My name is Holly Coxon, and today I'm here on behalf of Safe Software to talk to you all about application integration and connecting business systems with FME. Cool. I'm going to start by sharing an example that demonstrates today's topic. So the city of Surrey is based just south of Vancouver in Canada, and they wanted to improve data workflows between systems for a water meter process project. So whenever a developer needs water meters installed, they placed a request for a permit using the tool Amanda. Previously, from then on, the city relied on complex data integrations, manual workflows, and stored procedures with nightly data synchronization jobs to move this data around. So instead, they wanted to automate the communication between systems. So this included CityWorks for asset management, Amanda for permitting, and then Esri GIS. So they were able to accomplish this by building API-driven workflows that integrate data in real time between these applications. So this project was so successful that the city is now exploring what other projects they can apply this integration method to, including business intelligence and public safety applications. So this is an example of application integration, which is just one of the ways that integration can be implemented, but what I'll be primarily focusing on in today's session. So there are two main methods of integration and integrating data. Application integration, which you just heard about at the City of Surrey, and then data integration, which I suspect many of you are already familiar with. So today I'm going to be providing you with a high-level overview of both of these integration methods before diving into an example using FME to perform an application integration task. So I hope this will help guide you in determining how best to tackle the integration challenges in your workspace. So today I'll provide you with a brief overview of who we are at Safe Software and then introduce you to our platform, FME, in an effort to help you understand who we are in the market when it comes to integration and its challenges. I'll provide with you some more real-world examples that illustrate the concepts of data and application integration, and then give you a basic technical overview about working with webhooks and building API access, which are both key to successful application integration workflows. I hope that you'll walk away from this session with some ideas about how integration can help your business open up communication across systems for better data sharing. So I've been an FME server technology expert at Safe Software for the past almost 2.5 years actually now. And I fall under the customer success umbrella. So that means my role entails supporting customers with all things FME. So at Safe Software, our mission is to help organizations maximize the value of their data. And that's no matter where it is stored, what applications you are using, or who you need to provide access to. So in my daily work, I'm often supporting customers as they explore how best to integrate information. So the software platform I'm supporting customers with is FME. This is a data integration platform with the best support for spatial data worldwide. FME first aims to connect data from a variety of different sources, and off the bat we support well over 400 formats, and this expands greatly with the tools we have available to work with web services. After this, we provide the tools necessary to perform a range of transformations. So this stretches from data validation to manipulation to statistical analysis, and includes joining and merging data sets before sending it out to whatever format you require. The final stage is then to start automating these integrations by building workflows that can run on a regular basis or in response to event-driven processing. So I primarily work with the part of our product that allows you to automate these workflows. So this quick screen grab of the interface demonstrates how our GUI offers users the ability to perform data integration automations in a way that no coding is required. And we're going to dive into a demonstration later on in this session where you can see that for yourselves. So let's start with the main challenge. Organizations spend a lot of money building their data sets and installing sensors to collect information from connected things. But data is only as valuable as it is used. So data silos are in place in every organization and government agency. And this is often due to financial restraints by a project or the long-standing tradition of dividing departments by function. So in reality, each area of specialty should be able to use the best fit-for-purpose applications. And however, the data they need to access is often stored in a way that either makes this impossible or makes it extremely difficult to share across teams. So when this is done, it's often a custom-built solution that may break with the next update or make updating requirements extremely costly. So in short, data is in a format or a system that users can't easily access. That is, not everyone actually has the tools to access the data at its source, or data is too complex and hard to understand. So expert knowledge is required to navigate those systems or actually interpret the data. So here's an image that represents what kind of silos might be in place. Within a city, the GIS department is using Esri, the permitting department is using CityWorks, and the finance department is using SAP. So with data confined to these silos, there is a challenging business impact. Firstly, decision makers don't have access to the full picture. Time is spent performing repetitive administrative tasks with an increased chance of human error. And IT teams are spending their time writing and maintaining these point-to-point scripts to integrate these systems. So the solution to data silos is integration. And within this methodology, there are several options for achieving the objective to ensure that data users can access the information they need in whatever system makes most sense for them. So both data integration and application integration accomplish this in a way that eliminates the duplication of manual data entry and bridges data between these systems. So data integration is performed on data that is at rest and aims to bring together data from a variety of sources to create a single unified data set. When data in one database changes, it can trigger event-driven workflow to update another database, or it can be synchronized on a schedule, or you may even want to offer a self-serve data upload and validation service. So for example, perhaps you want to enable building developers to submit CAD files for the city's GIS for digital plan submissions. So application integration, on the other hand, uses webhooks and APIs to communicate at the transaction level. So this is to inspire an application itself or another application to actually take action. So we took a look at an application integration example with the City of Surrey. So before I continue exploring application integration, I wanted to switch gears and take an even closer look at a data integration example. So here we have Arup, who are a worldwide multidisciplinary engineering and design firm. They're known for projects like London St Pancras International Train Station, the Sydney Opera House, and the CCTV building in Beijing. The project we will focus on today involves our Australia office, which was working on the Sydney Light Rail expansion. A team of 8 Arab engineers were tasked with manually identifying underground utilities which clashed with the new proposed rail route. The team was given numerous data sets from various stakeholders. This ranged from city mapping data, GIS, CAD, 3D asset information, and survey and design data. So in addition to the data challenges they faced, the utility corridor below the surface was already at 85% capacity. This meant that there was very little room for any error. The engineers knew the manual option was going to be a long and tedious process, and they were going to have to figure out a way to convert each individual dataset into a correctly scaled 3D model, and then manually stack each layer on top of one another to identify those clashes. Arab decided to automate the process using FME. So by harnessing FME's ability to integrate complex spatial data, Arab was able to create a reusable workflow that integrated all of the datasets and applications. They then automated it to update each week as new survey data came in. So this meant they were able to provide two outputs for stakeholders to consume the information provided by this newly integrated dataset. The first was a solid 3D model in which clashes could be visualized, and the second was a web interface where clashes were shown on the network map with greater accuracy and could be clicked on and viewed in detail with attribution. So these were shared with the 25 utility asset stakeholders, which included Sydney Water, Australia's Origin Energy, Vodafone and Verizon. So by implementing data integration, the team ended up saving hours of work and enabled the engineers assigned to the project to focus their time on other elements of the design. The data output in the workflow was so valuable that many of the asset owners requested a copy of the enhanced data to improve their own internal utility network systems. So ARC continues to now use FME to support many of their other projects. So for the remainder of the session, I'm going to be diving in to talk about application integration in more detail. And so I wanted to take a moment to talk about enterprise integration patterns before I do that. So a pattern is a series of steps that provide the framework for enterprise integration solutions. These patterns are not tied to specific implementations, but rather they provide a method of communication between systems. So if we were to apply this to integration, are there regular ways in which something is done across all different organizations in different industries? You can implement the examples I just shared with you by examining your organization's architecture and inventing your own solution to how the integration could be optimally implemented. So the authors of this book, Enterprise Integration Patterns, noticed that integrating enterprise applications was a difficult task, and this was exacerbated by the lack of a common language. So they went on to identify 65 patterns or repeatable solutions that use this technology-independent vocabulary with diagrams to document these integration solutions. And whilst this doesn't cover how to integrate every enterprise application or system out there, it does give people the opportunity to discuss and design integrations in a common way, regardless of their technical backgrounds or application experience. So this is going to enable you as a GIS professional to actually have ownership over these integration tasks, rather than relying on these IT teams and their complex scripts. So let's take a look at where application integration would be a more applicable solution. Application integration doesn't just ensure that data is updated at the database or file system level, but it can also orchestrate applications to take action. So in this example, our business partner, Spatial DNA, based in Ontario, has been working with the Township of Langley to enable the bidirectional exchange of data across systems. So they've created a workflow that dramatically reduces manual data entry for their staff as they work to coordinate garbage and compost cart exchanges. So what used to be several hundred tasks a week is now reduced to about 3. So they did this by using FME as a message broker to integrate Microsoft Dynamics CRM, billing, and address validation. and the work management platform for the third-party contractor who performs the delivery and exchange of these garbage and compost carts. So by enabling the systems to exchange data, the need for a human to perform this effort is eliminated. The city staff can now accomplish far more. So here you can see that automation is actually needed between systems, and it needs to take place in real time. So it's not just the data itself that's being integrated, but rather the workflows are inspiring actions in applications. And this is done using webhooks and APIs. So for the remainder of this session, I'm going to be diving into a demo using FME. So before I do that, I wanted to do a quick poll with the audience today, just to understand how familiar all of you are with FME. So I'll hand over to Maria to do that. Perfect, thank you. So what I'm looking for in this poll is really just to understand how all of you are actually using FME, so that when I go into the demo, I know how much I need to be explaining all of the different concepts and applications that I'm working with. I think if we just give everyone a minute or so to submit those answers, and then we can take a look at the results before moving on. Okay, I've also actually just got my panel back, so perhaps now I can actually share my video as well. And hello, everyone. Okay, so I think we can probably close down this poll now and take a look at these results.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you able to see them?
I am not seeing anything at the moment.
Let me. So there is, I guess I could read them to you.
Yeah, sure, let's do that.
Okay. So there's 19 people. 6 of them said that they've seen FME in action, but have not worked with it.
Great.
4 have used it, and 2 have never heard of Safe Software.
Okay, great, thank you. That's really helpful. Okay. So let me jump out. Oh wait, jump back into this presentation, sorry. There we go. Okay, so for the remainder of this session, I'm going to be walking you through a demonstration to integrate the applications Survey 123 and CityWorks. So I'll be using FME as the message-oriented middleware to enable these two systems to communicate with one another to actually share data in real time. So for many cities engage with their local population to help. Oh, sorry.
I think you need to share your slides.
Oh, sorry, the poll stopped.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't realise that. Thank you for interrupting.
There you go.
Can you see a slide again now?
Yes, and your face.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, many cities engage with their local population to help identify issues on the ground. And the idea behind this demo is that we have provided the public with a tool that allows them to report any road hazards they encounter. So in this example, we'll be using Survey 123 as this reporting tool. However, this is actually just one example, and the same steps that I apply could work for something as simple as Google Forms, or even as complex as a custom web application. So definitely what I'm showing is not just applicable to Survey 123, but the setup might be slightly different. So once a citizen has actually reported, in this case, a pothole into Survey 123, we want to feed this information directly into CityWorks as a service request. So from here, the city will then be able to perform inspections and create the necessary work orders to actually track the issue and keep the original notifier of their progress. So we'll be making use of the entire FME platform to actually perform these steps. So I'll try and give an introduction to all of those tools before I dive in to explain the specific demo. So the first part of my workflow is being able to feed information from Survey 123 into FME. And this can be done by creating a webhook in FME Server Automations. Is a webhook. Webhooks are a way to automatically send messages from one application to another with the use of a single URL. So webhooks are useful because they push data as soon as it becomes available after an event occurs, and there is no need for the receiving system to first put in a request for that data. So webhook URLs are created in the receiving application. So in this case, that is FME Server, and you must then register this URL with the system providing the data. So Survey 123 has the option to enable a webhook whenever a survey is being submitted. And then once received, FME can actually use this data to kickstart integration workflows, which will pass this data into other applications. So depending on the data provider, you'll have the option to specify different scenarios in which you'd like to receive the data and also what data you actually want to include in that. So in FME Server, webhooks are first defined within the automations interface as a trigger. So if you're new to FME, then automations provide the functionality to actually create event-driven workspace processing in real or near real time. And we can do this with a series of trigger protocols that can be used to start processing, and then a corresponding series of downstream actions. So I'll soon be jumping into the FME Server interface so I can actually demonstrate this in a little bit more detail. But each webhook URL that we create contains a unique ID for the automation and for the individual trigger. So because no two are the same, what this means is that you can create multiple webhooks in FME that can each be connected to a different system or for a different scenario within the same system. So at this point, I'm going to be jumping out of my slide deck, and I'm going to step into FME Server, and we're actually going to start creating one of these automations. So if you're new to FME Server, then this is where you can access FME through a web interface, and it's actually built on FME desktop functionality. So I'll be showing FME desktop later on in the session, but this is where you author workflows to actually read in data, perform those transformations, and then write it out into whatever format you desire. And then the FME Server component is added on top of that, and it allows you, once those workspaces are ready to be pushed into production, to actually set up these event-driven processing, which we call automations. It also allows you to set schedules if you have workspaces that need to be run at a regular interval. And it also has the option to start building self-serve applications as well. So if you want a user to be able to upload or download data, this is something that can be built through FME. So for now, I'm going to be jumping into automations, and I'm going to start by building a new automation here. So in automations, my webhook protocol is stored as a trigger. So this is going to be the initiator for every time I want this automation to run. It's going to run whenever that Survey 123 form is submitted. So just as an example of different triggers that we have the option to watch an S3 bucket, Dropbox, a directory for incoming files, modified files. We have the option to monitor an email server. We have lots of different options for triggers within automations, and this is going to allow you to run workspaces in real or near real time, depending on the trigger that you've selected. So in this case, we want to be generating a webhook URL that we're going to be feeding into our Survey 123 application for this pothole reporting. So at the moment, I'm not able to access my URL, and that's just because I haven't saved my automation yet. It needs to be saved so it can generate that unique ID. So I'm just going to leave this alone for now. There's no other parameters that need to be configured in order for me to use a webhook. And then the second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a logging action into this automation. So what I want to do is actually log the message that I'm receiving from Survey 123, so that firstly I can check that my process is working correctly, and also check how the information is being stored so that I know how to process it to be able to push it into CityWorks. So to do that, we have a drag and drop interface, and then we refer to the event that happens after the trigger as the action. And this is broken down into two categories. We have internal actions, which are events that are being performed on FME server. So most commonly, this is actually running the workspace to process that data. But we have filtering and logging capabilities as well. And then we also have external actions, which are when FME server is pushing information outside to an external client. So that might be sending an email to a person or uploading a file to that Amazon S3 bucket. So just like with triggers, there's lots of different options that we have available to help you build up these automations to do different functions. So for now, I'm going to add a log action. And if you are familiar with FME, you'll see that this is very similar to the FME Workbench canvas in terms that we have these different protocols here with input and output ports, but we can build connection lines between. So it's really easy to see the flow of information through this automation workflow. So now I need to select actually the action to run is going to be logging a message. And I want to log the entire message content from my webhook. So that's all the information that's being received from Survey 123. So from here, I can select Apply, and then I'm going to save this automation so that I can generate that URL. So once that's been done, I can now select my webhook, and I have this URL that's being generated with those unique IDs. And I just need to copy this because I'm going to push it into my Survey 123 application. So at the moment, whenever you're authoring these automations, they're not actually going to be receiving information from that webhook because they're still being in the process of being edited and things could be changing. So once we're ready to actually start monitoring this webhook, we simply need to start the automation. I'm going to go ahead and do that and then jump over to Survey 123 where we can set up this webhook, and then we'll see it in action, see the message come through. So I have a survey that I've already created in Survey 123. It's very simple and it has a series of parameters just to get some information from the reporter and then also some information about the pothole as well. So in order to set up a webhook in Survey 123, there's simply an option under Settings. So under here I have webhooks. You can see I have a couple of other webhooks set up in here as well. This one I'll be using later on in the demonstration. So we'll leave these ones alone. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new webhook. I'll give it the same name as my automation, just so that I know that those two are connected. And then the important part here is the payload URL. So this is going to be the URL that I just created in my FME server automation. So now what's going to happen is whenever a new record has been submitted to Survey 123, it's going to send that information into that URL. And I have the option to include what event data I want to include in the message. So for this example, I simply want to include the server response. I'm going to go ahead here and check that box and then select Save. So for Survey 123, it's really straightforward to integrate this webhook into the form, and depending on the application that you're using, this may either be some custom code if it's a customized application that you've created, or if it's any other application, usually they'll have some support for webhooks that enables to simply you to add them in like this without writing any script. So from here we can go ahead and open up our survey. And I'm just going to fill this out. If I can spell my own name, there we go. I'll leave the location as it is for now. And then I'll just add in some comments. There's a giant pothole in the road. And I'm going to leave the image section blank for now. I'll be using that later on. So now, as soon as my form has been submitted, what I'm going to do is jump back into my automation and view my automation log. And immediately what you'll see here is that I received a response from survey 123 with my information from that survey. So I have the date, my email address, and the comments that I left here as well. So what this is helpful for is we can see that this information is stored as a string of JSON. So now I know how it's being stored so that I can go and create a workspace that's going to pull this information down and pass it into CityWorks. So at this point, I'm just going to jump back into my presentation deck quickly. Okay. So now we've seen an example of how you can really quickly receive it from an application in real time. Before I jump into the next portion of the demo, I wanted to share a story from the city of Oshkosh on how they make use of webhooks and why this is really important for one of their projects. So the city has developed their own in-house web application, which is a custom leads tracker for the county's child abduction response team. So they are leveraging the FME platform to enable this team to see critical real-time data as an incident is happening on the map in their command center. So this gives incident command leaders valuable information to make real-time decision-making possible to help recover a missing child. So when location information about a missing child is entered into the leads tracker, this triggers a webhook from their SQL database to then automatically write these lat and long marker positions into ArcGIS Online, and that process is happening in seconds. So essentially no mapping component existed before FME was able to bridge the gap between the leads tracker and ArcGIS Online. And you can see how this is really important for the efficiency of this team. Okay. So now that we have our information from CityWorks and we're receiving that by a webhook, we now need to focus on the second part, so taking that information and pushing it into a CityWorks service request. And in order to do that, we need to be using API functionality. So when I talk about APIs, I'm going to be specifically talking about Restful APIs, because these are what we most often see customers interacting with, and they are widespread and often publicly accessible. So API stands for Application Programming Interface, and is a method of communicating programmatically with tools and functions already predefined and built. So they are often part of a larger application or software package and are used to communicate with a small part of a subset of that much larger system. So REST APIs send and receive data through HTTP. So for our needs, you can think of these as a system of URL endpoints and associated requests that interface with an application and can be used both to push up and bring down data. So in this example, CityWorks is the application that we are communicating with. Service request is the endpoint. So this references the subset of the system that we want to be communicating with. And then ID 1234. So after the question mark, this is the query string. And depending on the type of request, this either represents a parameter that can be used to actually filter down that request further. So in this example, I'm fetching down the service request 1234. But it could also be used to push information into CityWorks. So perhaps if this parameter query string was extended, I'd actually be creating a new service request, and I'd have different parameters here to control the information being passed into CityWorks. So this is just an oversimplified example of what this URL might look like. There are other kinds of APIs as well, JavaScript, XML, SOAP. However, REST is the one that we most commonly see people using. So JSON, I mentioned previously when we looked at the message coming from survey 123. And JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it is often the language of interchange. So that is what is sent in the request and what is received in the response. So this format is commonly used to transfer data over the web, and it's a lightweight human and computer readable data interchange format. So it's made up of keys and values. So once we get into FME, these will then be treated as attributes. So in this description, the category and the status are the keys, and the streets and received are those values. So in order to work with this JSON in FME, we must first actually parse the string. So extract these keys and values from the single string and translate them into useful bits of information, so attributes that we can use to build up the next request. So we can do this in FME by using JSON-specific transformers that allow us to actually break down this string into individual features. So there are a few things to take into consideration when working with APIs. Firstly, what is the HTTP method being used? This depends on what you're trying to achieve with your calls. Are you bringing data down or pushing it up? Is that new or changes to existing data? Secondly, you need to consider what information needs to be passed into the request and how. So this is request specific and should be detailed in the documentation. So most applications that have APIs exposed have extensive documentation that helps you build up the necessary requests. So finally, if you were to access this application in a web browser, does it require user credentials to gain access? If it does, then you'll likely need to also be setting up authorization when making these calls to APIs. So authorization can usually be done in a variety of ways. Basic username and password can usually be used, but usually that's sent as part of the request in plain text. So it's not the most secure route. And instead, if there is an option to use a token, then this is definitely the preferred method and what we'd recommend you explore when you start to set up these integration workflows yourself. So for the remainder of the session, I'm going to finish off that demo and we're going to start communicating between Survey 123 and CityWorks. So in order to do that, the first thing I need to do is actually create a workspace in FME Workbench. So for those of you that haven't really worked with FME before, FME Workbench is a desktop application. And this is really where all of your authoring workflows are going to start. So this is where you build those transformations between data sets, so either one or multiple data sets, perform these various different transformations, and then write them out. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pulling that data in from our Survey 123 webhook. And the first thing that we need to do is we actually need to, let me just zoom in here, we need to flatten out that JSON to make it into usable attributes. And we're doing that with our Json Flatten transformer. So what I've got here is I've set the document to that survey123 parameter. So that's the message content coming in from my webhook. And then the transformer is going to do all the work for us. I simply need to specify what attributes I want to expose in my workspace. And these are the ones that I'm going to be using in my CityWork service request. So the email address, the date, and those comments as well. So the key thing about building these workflows in FME is there's absolutely no coding required. We've built, I believe there's over 500 different transformers to allow you to do all of the transformations necessary. And FME is going to be doing that hard work behind the scenes. And you simply need to fill in a couple of different parameter fields to make some decisions about what we're going to be doing with your data. So the key component of this workspace is the survey request creator. And this transformer is green, and that's because it's a custom transformer that we at Safe Software have built specifically for the CityWorks APIs. So a custom transformer is simply a series of different transformers wrapped up into one. So if I jump behind the scenes in this transformer, you'll see there's a couple of different transformers here doing various things. But the key one is the HTTP caller. So the HTTP caller is the parameter that's going to allow you to set up communication with that API. So we're going to add in our request URL. So in this case, our endpoint, sorry, it's probably quite small, is creating a service request. And then we have our query string parameters. And in this case, that's the information that's being uploaded to CityWorks. And that's being defined from our survey123 attributes. And then the final thing we have here is our authentication. So I'm using a web connection, which is going to generate a token to allow me to communicate with this API. So using the HTTP caller transformer, you can communicate with any application that has an API available to you. So as long as you have their documentation to work with, you'll be able to identify exactly what parameters you need to fill out and how in order to work with those. So then the final part of my workflow is I have a couple of other things happening after that request is created. The first thing that I want to do is I want to send out an email to the reporter to notify them that we've received the request and provide them with some additional information as well. And the second thing that I want to do is check if the image had an attachment, if there was an image attachment on the survey. So to upload an image to a survey request in CityWorks requires a second API call. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually going to have a second workspace that I'll be chaining to my automation in the case that an attachment does exist. So both of these are being written out to automation's writers. And you'll see that when we go over into the automation, this is actually adding in an additional output port to that workspace node so that I can say, okay, if this is happening, I want this next action to happen in my automation. So now if I dive over to my automation, I have a second one I've already created. And as you can see, this is a little bit more complex than our previous one with just the webhook and the log. So this time what I have is the same webhook trigger. But then after that, I'm actually triggering my workspace. So this is the workspace I just created in FME Desktop. I've published it to FME Server. So publish is just the term that we use to upload these workspaces. And then I'm able to set that survey123 message to the feature coming from the webhook. So this is going to be dynamic and changing every time. So every time this workspace runs, it's going to be processing new information from the webhook. So then after that, you'll see I have the attachment and the email ports. So these are additional ports because of those writers I added in the Workbench. So I've said, okay, if there is an attachment, I want to run a second workspace, and that is going to be populated using the survey request that was created in the first workspace, so that I can call the second API call to upload that image to this request. And then the second thing I have is my email. And the important part about this configuration, as you can see, this one has a lot more parameters. So depending on what you're doing in your automation, different configurations are going to be necessary. But the important part is the email too. So this email is a parameter, and it's coming from my webhook information that was then passed out into an individual attribute. So in the webhook, it was stored as an entire string. So I needed just the email, and so we passed the JSON using that Json Flatten transformer, which means I now have the single email to send that information to. And then the final thing I have here is a second email action that I haven't configured, but I just wanted to show you how you can start to add in fail-safe to your automation workflows as well. So here we have failure ports. So if the workspace failed to run for any reason, we have a backup, and we can say, send this to the CityWorks manager and say, okay, this information was meant to be sent to CityWorks. It wasn't. Please make sure a service request is created and to follow up with the reporter. And also for them to know that something's wrong with this automation so they can go in and take a look and make sure that this is working so that they don't have any downtime. So now that we've got all of that set up, what we can actually do is start the automation. We'll go and submit another survey, and then we'll go ahead and see the entire process in action here. So I just need to open up a second survey. And this time I'm going to send it to my email. I'll move this location around. I'll put it on this cross here. And this time I am going to upload an image so that we can see that second workspace being triggered as well. So I'm going to select an image. Luckily, this is not a pothole I saw myself, but just something I took from Google. And then we'll go ahead and submit. So what's going to happen is if we now go into my email, I'm just going to refresh. And hopefully in a short moment, we'll see, here we go. We've just received this new email coming at 11:54. So I, as the receiver, oops, sorry, there's a duplicate one there because I was testing this. And what we've seen is we've got the confirmation of the pothole. And because I've used HTML, I've been able to embed an image into this workflow. So this is something you can customize to your city's needs as well, or your company's needs, sorry. And then I also have some information in the email body about my service request. So I have the service request ID here. So as a user, perhaps you're able to provide a website which allows them to track the status of their request. So that information is useful as well. Now I'm going to take that service request and jump over to CityWorks, and we'll have a look here as well. And you can see that I've also created this service request. So here I have the address location, and that's been generated in FME from the X and Y coordinates that I provided. I also have the comment that I submitted in here from our request caller, and we also have the image attachment provided by that survey as well. So now if I were to go into my automations and view triggered jobs, I can see that at 11:54, I submitted that first request, and then it also triggered the second workspace to run as well because that attachment existed. So I know I'm running quite short on time, so I apologize that that was a very quick run through of APIs in FME, but hopefully you get the idea that it's pretty straightforward to start building these application integration workflows in FME. So as I mentioned, that transformer for CityWorks was a custom transformer. And so on our FME hub, we have made a series of custom transformers available for download, which have essentially just wrapped up the common REST API calls for CityWorks. So if there is a different application that you'd like to work with, it's definitely worth browsing FME Hub first, because we've done this with a number of applications as well. And if there's something missing, we'd definitely like you to get in touch with us and tell us what you're working with as well. So the key things I wanted you to take away from this session are that the solution to data silos is integration. So we can do that by using Webhook to send data immediately as it becomes available, and using APIs, in which case there is a request followed by a response. So for application and data integration, FME can act as a middleware that allows you to perform these workflows. And integration is going to enable decision makers to gain access to the full picture. It reduces the time spent manually performing these tasks and takes away any chance of human error there as well. So it can be really powerful within your organization. So I have a few useful links here that I wanted to share with you. In particular, the first two links on the left-hand side I used as the basis for the demo that I showed you today. So they go into a lot more detail on everything that I was able to share with you. And so I know I've left it very short for time, but are there any questions from anyone? Okay, I think not.
I had to unmute. There was a question, but you actually, he said that you answered it. Could you actually go back to that last slide so they can see those websites?
Yes. Let me see. I wonder if I can copy them and share them in the chat as well, if I can find this chat again. I'm not sure if I can, actually.
I think you might have to stop presenting.
Okay. Just don't have the, in my practice run through, I had a section at the top where I could actually find the panel to stop presenting, but I just don't have that. Okay, I found it. Let's do that. Sorry. Stop sharing. Okay, there we go. Let me copy some links in here for you. So I'm just going to copy them all, and hopefully that will be enough for anybody that wants to be able to save these and go away and look at them in their own time. There's lots of resources there because this is a really interesting topic, but it can be quite complicated to understand if it's your first time kind of working with Webhook and APIs and applications. So definitely recommend going through some of these demos in your own time to try and understand this in a little bit more detail. This is a very quick overview, so.
Well, we thank you for being here, and thanks, Kat. Just wanted to thank all the people who attended today. Make sure, I think now is the official lunch break, and there's a lunch breakout session you can go to. But after that, just thanks for being here. We wouldn't be here without all of our sponsors, and I guess have a good lunch. If Holly, if there's anything else you want to say.
No, just thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you got something out of it. I'm glad Kat definitely did, so that's great. And enjoy the rest of the conference as well.